Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlien with you, and this is the Schaftlien Report. We're going to cover everything. We're going to cut through all the propaganda, give it to you straight from left, right, and center. The opinions are what counts. Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlien with you, and this is the Schaftlien Report. It's the weekend edition, and we are going to summarize an eventful week in American politics. We're going to talk a little bit about America from its birth to where it is now. And we're going to get into the events that took place on Friday when Robert Kennedy withdrew from the race and supported Donald Trump. And for this discussion, folks, we could not have a more appropriate guest. Tom Beccaro, he authored a book, I'm going to get the name of this correct, The Lessons of the American Civilization, Its Rise and the Warning Signs of Its Decline. Thomas, welcome to Schaftlien Report and Patriot TV. What a time we are in right now. My goodness, we have a convention where someone becomes the nominee who's never gotten a vote, and then we have a candidate who, against his best efforts, literally slammed by the DNC. Thomas, give me your thoughts on the week, Kennedy, and then I want to dive into your book because, boy, it is so appropriate for the time we're living in right now.
Yeah, this is an extraordinary time, no question about it. And when I first started reading history books, literally as a young teenager, I was attracted to Will and Ariel Durant's work. I read it exhaustively. They talked about the rise and fall of civilizations, and I would not have guessed in my lifetime that the things that we are seeing going on in America today would happen. I thought one day they would happen, but I didn't think I'd see it in this context so early on or so quickly. And what we're seeing today exhibits warning signs of decline, where the government is actually protecting itself from the citizens. They want our money, but not really our 2 cents. They are making it so that they get reelected consistently instead of the disruption of parties switching that we used to have. And this is a dangerous moment. If this continues, the Republic will suffer in the years ahead. As far as Kamala, you're right. I debated her in 2016 in the U.S. Senate races. She didn't provide much information then. She hasn't provided much information now, but think about it. Obama didn't either. Certainly Joe Biden ran a basement campaign, and now they're doing it again on platitudes and not details. And quite frankly, it's worked for her so far. Her PR organizations, CNN, MSNBC, and others, are not requiring it. And the question becomes, in the days and weeks ahead, will that really be all she does, is one debate and otherwise avoid the press? And if so, in a dangerous world we live today, what does that mean?
Oh, I absolutely think that she will. I mean, you can disagree with the policies of the Democratic Party, but it's not an accident that they've been in power in the White House 12 out of the last 16 years. It's not an accident that she hasn't been in front of the mainstream media or legacy media or new media or any media. No press releases, no press conferences, no interviews for 33 days. And now she said, well, maybe by the end of August, I'll do an interview. Look, Thomas, I watched that speech the other night on Thursday night when the Democrats had their final coronation. And at the end of that speech, I was just thinking that would make a moderate Republican happy, what came out of her mouth in that acceptance speech. And the policies, or not policies, but general innuendos that she talked about resemble nothing close to what her past references have been. You know her on a personal basis. I mean, is this any surprise to you? I mean, I literally felt I was Lowell Weicker, the old Connecticut senator. He could have given that speech. It was sort of a just barely center left, if you will, a policy speech last night that, again, if I was a moderate Republican, I probably would have been clapping at 80% of that speech last night on Thursday night.
You're dating us by bringing up Senator Weicker, but you're 100% right on that. Look, there was a British politician who said very long ago about someone that they bear the impression of the last blank that sat on him. And that's the reality for her. When she first started out in politics as a DA in San Francisco, she was under the tutelage of Willie Brown, who is a very powerful Democrat, but he was practical. And she did some practical things. She did some far left things, like not follow the law as the DA on the death penalty, and that ironed a lot Dianne Feinstein and also Barbara Boxer, the U.S. senators at the time. In fact, Feinstein said if she would have known about this, she would have not supported Harris. And that's why they never really got along, by the way, when she got into the Senate. But the farther she got away from Willie Brown, the more left that she got. And then she showed up in Washington, D.C. in January of 2017, and she started to vote as a liberal. But when she decided to run for president, she moved even farther left because her consultants told her what you and I both know, that if you want to be a president in the Democrat Party, the nominee, you have to move left and you have to be louder and more liberal than anyone else. So she promptly decided to go to the left of Bernie Sanders. And so now that the fact that she's a chameleon and flip-flopping on all these issues has nothing more to do than what you and I both know is she's just trying to get elected. And then when she actually gets elected, she'll say something like the time-honored, oh, the circumstances are different. Also, just want to close this statement by saying this. Socialism is never sold on the benefits of socialism, which require conformity and uniformity and a crackdown on dissent. It's sold by demonizing the other side and saying, if you don't elect us, there's going to be trouble out there, which is all she said about Trump last night. And that's where she is.
Thomas, America is clearly a divided country. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And in your book, you talked extensively about this. And the question is, I mean, it's the old Yogi Berraism. Okay, we're at a fork in the road. Okay, take it. But we literally are at this point. I mean, these policy differentials. I know it was damn near impossible when you watch that Democratic convention to hear anything other than we're the abortion party, abortion on demand, and Trump is a bad orange man. He's a threat to democracy. He's the most horrific thing ever. I mean that's it. Basically, it was criticize Trump and talk about abortion, when in fact the overwhelming majority of voters, and this is the perplexing thing about it, the voters are most concerned about the economy and they're most concerned about that border where 12.1 million people have come across under the Biden administration, Biden-Harris, and that's what people care about. 2/3 of Americans think the country's going in the wrong direction. But inexplicably, we now have, well, it's not inexplicably at all, it's very explainable, and we're going to talk about it. We now have a very tight race, and in most of the polls, she has a 1 to 3 point lead. The swing states are tighter than a tick. But in your book, you talk about this and about which path we're going to go. How do you see this thing playing out? Because by any stretch of the imagination, over the last 40 days, this country has been through something no one could have predicted at the start of the year.
You're right. At the start of the year, the Democrats were divided. They were headed to the finish line with Joe Biden, and then a debate which showed us the obvious, that he was no longer able to do this job, has changed everything. In 2015, I wrote the book that's over my shoulder, The Divided Era, which talks about how divided we are. And we're seeing this on display. I mean, you probably saw the interviews where they asked Harris supporters, tell us your favorite Harris policy, and they couldn't do it. So even though they don't really know what she is going to do, they adhere to it along the party line. And that's very much a example of a divided era where the parties are just so far apart that there's no crossover. And so she's satisfies some 89% of all Democrats I saw in one poll are happy with her being there, and that probably will occur. And I talk about it also in this book, The Lessons of the American Civilization. So we're going to have these tight races for years to come because we are split in that way. And especially since the left's media is such a PR agency, we're really in the party press era again with respect to the Democrats. So I expect a tight race. I don't expect them to push her. They will make excuses for her when she says some not very smart things in the upcoming debate, and we can talk about that. But the reality is she is doing the time-honored thing for a socialist, which is not provide detail. Don't say how you're going to accomplish this lofty goals. I mean, just think about it. Last night she said, we're going to build 3 million houses. No, you're not. And by the way, that was a dumb thing to say because no one thinks she's going to build the houses or government. But it's a great platitude. Socialists are demagogues. They give platitudes. They don't give details. And then when it comes to governing, they govern far left. Remember when Reagan says they campaign in the middle and they govern to the left.
Oh, Tom, you're so right about that. And the best example I can give is, again, no conferences, no press conferences. One thing about, a primary, going through that process, it exposes you. I mean, Kennedy talked about that when he left the race on Friday, and after the break, we're going to talk about Kennedy. But, when she made her first unscripted comments, what were those comments? Think about this, folks. It was wage and price controls. It was straight out of the socialist Marxist playbook. These ideas about that she exposed herself on, unscripted moments, even duplicating, Trump's no tax on tips piece that shocked many of her Senate Democratic colleagues. They, at that point, says, we've got to keep this woman under wraps because if she were to talk about what her real policy position is, and we've played the Dave McCormick video countless times, I mean, people would not go for that. So she's smart enough to realize that, and that's why, I'm telling you, this election, again, as you and I are talking right now, when it is not an exaggeration to say it is the most important election in our lifetime, because she is tried and true a socialist. She is to the left of Bernie Sanders, and all these things that came out of her speech on Thursday night, I don't believe them for a second. All right, we are going to take a 90-second break, but when we come back, I want to dive into Kennedy's speech on Friday, his support for Trump, and the positions he talked about, Tom, they're really applicable to what you put in your book. All right, be back in 90 seconds.
Sounds rolling, all 3 cameras, we're good.
Is there any regrets that you have in life? I should sit here and say, I got a lot of regrets. But when I look back on my life and I understand the lives that were lost, I mean, I'm sitting here with you. And I can tell my story.
Former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, pleading guilty today to lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
Brilliant military career, serving 33 years.
Why was he being so elusive?
Mike Flynn told the truth and faced life in prison.
Every American needs this historical DVD keepsake. Flynn delivered the truth, whatever the cost. Hand signed by General Michael Flynn, one of America's most treasured military heroes. Order now at the Patriot TV store. Go to Patriot TV, click on Store, and grab a once-in-a-lifetime chance to own a treasured piece of American history. And get your own personal download link to watch America's most talked-about movie, as well as a DVD hand-signed by General Michael Flynn. Use promo code PTV at checkout to get special savings. The Patriot TV store. Incredible savings and a secure, hassle-free shopping experience.
And we're back with Thomas Del, make sure I pronounce this right, Beccaro. Tom, Kennedy withdrew from the race on Friday, okay? And in his withdrawal, he stated a lot of things that you wrote in your book, and I took some notes. He talked about the party of war, talked about abandoning principles, talked about corruption, big pharma, domestic lawfare, trying to keep him off the ballot, trying to put Trump in jail. Democracy is a slogan. That's what the Democrats are using it for. And censorship. You talked about all these items when you wrote your book, and I'll be damned if every one of them applied to Kennedy, and now he's calling the Democratic Party out on these. And again, this is Robert Kennedy, whose father and uncle were assassinated running for political office in this country. One was president, one was trying to be president.
Yeah, it was quite honestly a tour de force speech. Every American should listen to it. He talked about censorship, and then during that process, CNN cut him off because he was talking about big media censorship, which is a commercial in and of itself, isn't it? In my book, I talk about the dangers of centralizing power in government. America succeeded because at its founding, economic and political power were pretty even throughout the country. There was no big centralized government. You had 13 colonies, and while it was true Virginia was the most powerful among them, Virginia didn't impose much on Georgia or anyone else prior to the Constitution. So it was evened out, and anyone could succeed, almost anyone economically, slavery excluded, could succeed. And that allowed for an even base democracy or a republic because individuals were close to power. They could participate in many ways in government, whether it's running for office or voting. The danger in history is when power centralizes political power in a capital like we have today. Also, when big government does business with big business to the exclusion of everyone else. Big pharma has its big deals. They decided policy far more than you and me, even though we have an outsized voice compared to many people. Or take McDonnell Douglas. And so the danger to the republic today is that it's almost like an oligarchy where big interests are making the decisions and not the citizens. And what happened to RFK was part of what dynamic, which I call, is that we're in the stage of our civilization where those in power are protecting themselves from us. And what does that look like? It is where the DOJ and the FBI, as I wrote about 3 years ago at Fox News, are wanting to decide who can be president of the United States by letting Hillary go despite the obvious signs of crimes and going after Trump so dramatically. And censoring. They are now censoring, part of a process that are censoring those who disagree with government. Importantly, in my book, I say dissent is the mother of democracy. You cannot have a free government if you are not free to criticize it. And censorship, which is why RFK said he abandoned the Democrat Party, because they're doing everything they can to censor him along with its media, friendly government media. That's why he left. And if we don't recover that, then, like other times in history, our republic will decline.
You know, Thomas, he when he stepped aside on Friday, he did it in a slightly different way. I believe he took his name off the ballot in all of the swing states, but left it on in the deep red and deep blue, the ones he had qualified for the ballot. Is that how your reading was? Because he did come out, and he has strongly come out for Donald Trump now. And what did the Democrats at the Democratic National Convention do when they perceived that this was going to happen? They called him a fraud, a turncoat. Again, everything they could to smear him, because the man has a conviction. He has beliefs. He was part of that party for the better part of his life. And now he's sort of treated as a complete outcast by the Democratic Party. That's also consistent with many of your writings and many of the things you've been representing when you've gone on various talk shows.
Yeah, absolutely. The socialists demonize. That is their goal. They say, oh, if you support this person or vote for this person, tragedy's going to happen because this person is the worst person on earth. That's what they say about Trump, is it not? And think about what Kamala said, outright lies. He doesn't support the 2025 project, all that's in it. He doesn't even know that's in it because he hasn't read it and he didn't commission it. But they don't care. They're outright lying to people. She outright lied, said his intent is to throw his opponents in jail. So what else do socialists do? They blame you for their tactics. And keep this in mind about RFK. You mentioned that he's principled. He is. He has a strong libertarian bent. He's against centralized government because he knows where it ends up. And quite honestly, that's who I am as a person. You cannot read history and be objective at all and not be concerned about centralizing power and its negative effects on standard of living by squelching the economy and on freedom, real freedom, not just, quote, freedom to choose whether to have an abortion or not, but freedom in the sense that you have the right to dissent and affect your government. That's being lost. RFK stood up for it. The reason why the Democrats hate Trump is he's standing up to it. And if we don't stand up to it as a nation, then we're at risk of losing this republic, because that's the definition of democracies and republic, which is a freedom to dissent and have a voice. And if that's not important to you and you want to go with centralized power, okay, just admit it. But it's a very strong lesson of history. And in my book, The Lessons of the American Civilization, I talk about that at length.
Well, as the late, great Rush Limbaugh used to say, there's a lot of voters from Rio Linda, just joking, but there are a lot of low information voters out there, Thomas, and they look at, as I said this, I was talking about it on Election Edge earlier in the week. If this election comes down to issues and what's best for the United States, what's best for its people, Donald Trump will win this election, because on the surface, people genuinely have a fondness for Trump policies from when he was president. You know, we didn't have super high inflation. Yes, it's come down, but food prices are up 22% since Biden and Harris took over. We're in the midst right now of war in the Middle East and war with Russia and Ukraine and countless others around the globe. We didn't have that when Trump was in office. And the demagoguery of Trump has reached new heights. I mean, at that speech on Thursday night, it was filled with lies. They came out and they said Donald Trump is for a nationwide ban on abortion. Thomas, there's zero truth to that, none whatsoever. They said Donald Trump wants to cut your Medicare. Donald Trump has never uttered one word about cutting Medicare. Then Donald Trump wants to cut your Social Security. That not only was a lie, but Trump has advocated that people not have to pay tax on their Social Security income. So, I mean, whether you, on the surface, and this is, again, to borrow your points out of your book, this is what socialists and Marxists do. They paint the rosy picture. They appeal to a certain group, a certain demographic of the population. And in this case, the Democratic Party seems to be going to those on the south end and those at the very high end. So you look at how things are breaking, complete lies about Trump, mischaracterizations, and putting out literally no policies of their own other than shifting to the center, which, Thomas, you warned about in your book and when you were dealing with her in California. Make some sense of this madness if you can. No pun intended. We have a great show making sense of the madness. But in seriousness, Thomas, this is uncharted times right now, because we have a candidate now, major party candidate, who literally got no votes, picked by party elders. It is what it is. It is legal within the democratic system, but you have to question the ethics behind it. But she is the candidate, and that's who we have to beat nowadays. So I would hope that Trump would get off the Biden train and start really focusing on the damage that this woman could do if she ever got near that Oval Office.
Well, you said a lot of things there. And other than that, what's your
did.
problem with what's going on, right? Other than
You've
that,
got plenty
Mrs.
of
Lincoln,
open
how do you
field.
like to play? I do. Let me say this about inflation, because I hope people will use this, what I say, this line about it, when they talk to their Democrat friends. What they're saying is we had a run up in inflation intense, and now it has cooled off a bit, but prices are still rising, which I say, and they're saying, okay, so everything's fine. And I say, that's like a thief knocking on your door saying, I robbed you 20% of your possessions yesterday, but I'm only going to steal 3% of them today. So you should feel good about this. And also, she's just going to reignite that with a huge tax increase, cutting down on the goods and services that will be supplied to us by dragging the economy down. And then, of course, she's going to run huge deficits. And as a result, inflation will be reignited. Economically, this is a crossroads, because we're at 35 trillion in national debt. We're no longer at 5 or 6 trillion. We're at a really high number, and we have almost a permanent inflationary dynamic going on that we have to be careful about. In chapter 10 of my book, it's called America, Capitalism, and Socialism. We did not get here overnight. But how did we get to a place where a daughter of a Marxist professor and it becomes the leading candidate and says things like everybody needs to earn the same amount or end up in the same place, which of course is ludicrous. We can't end up in the same place. You cannot start a restaurant unless you have savings that your dishwasher doesn't. People don't start out their jobs at the same level of those who have them. And I just want to bring a circumstance of this. Many years ago, I went to a lower income place in California, Pittsburgh, California, and I spoke to students. And the very diverse economic group, very diverse cultural group, and I asked them, how many of you, and these obviously, there's a junior college, so these are 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And I said, raise your hand if you think my daughter and I should be making the same amount of money. Not one person raised their hand. Yet if we all end up in the same place, like they do in Cuba for the vast majority of people, or Venezuela or Russia, that's really the implication. And then you have Tim Walz saying that doctors should make the same as construction workers, which his policies would destroy incentives. But this did not happen overnight. Socialist and Marxist views arise after industrialization, not on the personal responsibility of an agrarian society where families are bonded together and are the economic unit. It's only after civilization migrates to the countryside, the levels of different talent result in different levels of income. There's some danger in the burgeoning capitalism in factories. And then these views, when some people make a lot more than others, like a Rockefeller, then these views of Marxism and socialism begin to appear, even though they're forgetting that Rockefeller's father was a drunk and a carpetbagger who disappeared from his life. 80% of Americans who are millionaires, 80% of the millionaires didn't inherit a dime, okay? So our system creates enormous wealth. And then when that wealth becomes so much, because America, I think in the 1950s, surpassed the point where over 50% of our personal consumption was on non-necessary items. What does that mean? We're buying movies or going to movies. We're buying the extra handbag, things that aren't necessary. For a country of 300 million, or at the time it was probably closer to something, that's an incredible accomplishment. The average American today The bottom 10% of Americans today do as well as the top 10% in Brazil, Italy, and a number of other countries. We have benefits that are extraordinary, including what amounts to a free healthcare system for some because they just go into the system and never pay anything. And we have forgotten that. But this is what happens when a system gets so rich that they become weaker in constitution, low testosterone men. Could you imagine landing on the shores of this country in the 1500s and having low testosterone? Low testosterone men are pacifists. That's what we used to say. So pacifism is a sign that you're declining. You can't rise with pacifism because you wouldn't exist. I'm saying a lot here, but here's the reality of it. The Kamala Harris of the world only comes after others produced, not before.
Yes. And I could tell you were channeling your best Dana Bash, who lambasted men with testosterone on coverage of Kamala Harris the other night. All right, we're a little bit past break. We're going to take a 90-second break, and then we're going to be back. It's more fascinating stuff coming out of this discussion, the stuff from the book, the campaign. We're going to get into some stuff the Fed's doing. We're going to talk a little bit about everything. Be back in 90 seconds.
Don't let them win. Patriot TV is committed to delivering the truth. America's new network for Patriots is growing fast, and we'd love you to join us as a member of Patriot TV. Your support makes it possible for us to continue to deliver unbiased reporting, thought-provoking discussions, and insights you won't find anywhere else. From in-depth interviews to behind-the-scenes footage, Patriot TV brings you closer to the voices shaping our nation's future. Whether it's political developments, cultural shifts, or global affairs, Patriot TV keeps you informed and empowered. As a member of Patriot TV, you'll get perks like personal invitations to exclusive Patriot TV events, where you can gather and network with like-minded Americans. We'll also host online events throughout the year with General Flynn, who's committed to host live Q&A webinars where callers like you can ask him questions and get real answers. Access to these events will be members only, so go to patriot.tv, click on Become a Member. It's fast and easy. We have a great membership option starting at just $9.99 a month, or save with our annual membership for only $99, or take advantage of the best value, the 2-year membership for just $159. Go to patriot.tv, click on Become a Member. It's fast and easy. Do your part to make sure the truth gets out to all Patriots and help ensure future programming. Become a member today. Just go to patriot.tv, click on Become a Member, join today.
And we're back. All right, so on Thursday night, Comrade Harris came out with no economic policies other than we're going to raise tax on wealthy Americans. It seems like that comes around every couple of years when we have an election in this country. We're going to find a path to citizenship for all the illegal immigrants in the country who, oh, by the way, have continued using services without paying for them. And we are going to just do everything possible, and this is where it just really got me irritated when they were talking about all the bad things that Trump's done, when in fact Trump has advocated solid economic policies. And when Trump was president, we had solid growth. People feared the United States, and we had inflation less than 1.5%. Right on cue, Thomas, the Federal Reserve came out on Friday, Jerome Powell, the chairman, and said it's time to start cutting interest rates. You know, I happen to slightly agree with him. We've had rates elevated for some time now, but inflation's cooled down, but it's not defeated. We still have 3% inflation, Fed funds rate at 5%. The Fed's going to cut, but economically, Americans still feel that this inflation is their number one issue, and they don't just view it from an inflation point of view. They view it for what it means when they go to the grocery store and they fill up their car with gas and they have to pay their insurance bill. And yet, here again, to follow your model of what you talked about, these are some of the steps when you demonize hard work, when you demonize people who have achieved wealth. It's normally you're on the other side of where the pendulum swings. And those societies, based upon history and what you wrote in your book, Thomas, they are not long-term survivors based upon the hard work that was put in when they were going up the pendulum.
Yeah, well, again, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with Powell. If you recall, inflation took off about 18 months after Biden was in. And the reason for that was, for the first time in American history, at the end of a crisis, instead of stopping the excessive spending, he kept going. And by the way, Republicans in Congress owe some of the blame for that as well. There's inflation and CPI. So let's talk about inflation real quick. Ideally, the supply of money grows at the same rate over time as the supply in goods and services. However, if they diverge, where the money supply rises for an extended period of time and output is reduced, as it happened during COVID, when the money supply took off for COVID payments and they shut down the economy initially by some over 30%, that's where the seeds of inflation go. The reason why Biden and Harris are at fault here is because they kept spending and they kept the economy shut down along with their friends in the blue states. So they own that issue. Then the next thing is CPI, which is different than inflation because, as Milton Friedman taught us, inflation is a monetary phenomenon caused by government. CPI measures things that influence supply and demand, like energy costs. And they have gone after that. And as a result, energy costs have risen, and that ripples throughout the economy. My point in telling you all of this is the same exact conditions that resulted in inflation. Remember when the Treasury Secretary said this was a temporary situation or transient? I immediately went up and wrote an op-ed saying, no, it isn't transient because all the reasons it started still exist, which is printing of money, reducing output, big deficits. All of those still exist today. So while the Fed has brought down the economy, because the only answer they have isn't to reignite and provide incentives for goods and services, because the socialists don't know how to do that, they just keep spending. So what does the government do after causing inflation for you and robbing you of 25% of your purchasing power? Oh, I know what they'll do. They're going to push you out of office. And that's how they did it. But the conditions that caused all this still remain, and we're what I call a flat tire away from a problem. And that flat tire could be a big shock in the Middle East because of war or some other thing that interrupts supply. And so we're at a dangerous crossroads. They have weakened the economy enough to even make the case, bring the interest rates down. But inflation will ignite again under a Harris campaign. They will not ignite under Trump because he knows you can't keep spending and he's going to reduce the cost of energy. Other than that, sorry, you're getting me passionate here.
Well, for good reason why. I mean, you talked about the money that was spent on COVID, and then what did Biden and Harris do? And Harris cast the deciding vote on these two bills. These bills were literally 50-50. There was, I think, the first bill, they spent $1.9 trillion. This is in addition to the COVID money that was spent. The second bill was $950 billion. Now, you don't need to be a rocket scientist there. That's just shy of $3 trillion of spending that all 50 Republicans in the Senate said no to. Well, because we had an equally divided Senate, Kamala Harris, cast the deciding vote as vice president, and voila, we ended up getting $3 trillion of additional spending.
Printed money.
Economic program,
Finance.
Printed money.
Financed by printed money, which means inflation.
100% spot on. Now, we fast forward to where we are today. Again, she didn't put out any economic policies. Finally, when Trump was going out on the stump and, literally from whether it was at Mar-a-Lago or campaign rallies or finding the nearest microphone in Bedminster, he was giving press conferences, he's giving speeches, and he's talking about these things. And I think it sort of forced her hand a little bit to talk economics. And then what does she do? She rolls out, the Marxist playbooks. And economists, even Jason Furman, who was President Obama's top economist, he said, no, none of this stuff, that we will never, none of this will ever pass. So sort of calm down. Don't worry about it. And by the way, if it did, we would add $1.7 trillion of more debt to what the government currently has. Well, Trump is talking pro-business and she is talking anti-business. And Thomas, that's what concerns me. I mean, she's advocating raising the corporate tax rate to 28%. It's at 21 right now. Trump has even talked about maybe lowering it to 15. You can already hear the arguments coming out. Well, Trump's for big business. He doesn't want to help middle America, et cetera, et cetera. You and I know damn good and well that's not true. If you raise that corporate tax rate, as she is advocating, to 28%, what are corporations going to do? They're going to go elsewhere. They will literally, there are countries around the world who would welcome them with open arms. Look no further than what's happened with China and Vietnam. China was, all these factories get built in China. Wages were low. All of a sudden, wages start going up in China. Well, what do some of the companies do? They say, well, wait a second, we can move to Vietnam or to India where wages are a fraction of where they are in China, and voila. China ends up having a problem with youth unemployment. Thomas, I mean, I'm really going across the globe here, but one thing about economic theory is it's consistent whether you're in a communist country or whether you're in a capitalist country, and those two are sort of getting blended together in certain parts.
Yeah, I talk about this in my book extensively, which, by the way, was endorsed by Dr. Arthur Laffer, Reagan's economist, the Laffer curve, and Stephen Moore, who's Trump's economist. Look, there's a difference between economics and politics. Economics is the study of human behavior. How does it respond to certain stimuli? And the bedrock law of economics, not theory, law, is that we are price sensitive. So if you're looking at a store on the left and the right, they offer the same pair of jeans. One sells it at $50 and the other one sells it at $100. Almost everyone, except for the friends of the $100 guy, is going to go buy the pants for $50. That applies to almost everything, right? There was a study about if you overprice a luxury item, there are some people who are more attracted to that. But Honda outsells Bentley on price, not quality. So here's the point of saying it. It also applies to making money. You go to the place where it's easier to make money. And so when you raise rates, that's why people stop reporting income or doing what you're describing for international companies, is to move your income somewhere else or otherwise hide it. Coolidge used to say that a high tax is never paid because they avoid it. And the socialist, there's no such thing as the socialist economy. That's a fraud. Socialist economists, that's a fraud. There's a socialist politician who passes laws and then human nature takes over. But you can't have a Marxist economist. No, you have a Marxist authoritarian who affects the economy. And that's what the Democrats are doing right now. They're going to enact certain things. If she got in there, she would do a lot of executive orders and she would destroy incentives. And when your incentives are destroyed, like they have been throughout history, keep in mind, during Eisenhower's era, the top marginal tax rate was 92% or 93%, and he cut it to 91. Oh, okay. And he had 3 sharp recessions because it wasn't a consistent capital formation during his term. So we're headed for some rough stuff here. By the way, it was JFK who cut it from that 90 plus rate down to 70 and unleashed 3 years in the 60s of 6% plus growth. And even Johnson talked about how effective that was. So there you go. That's what we're facing. It's why in 2008, I said, if we elect Barack Obama, the economy you're not going to have a good economy at any one point in time. It may bump for a little, but by and large, it's going to be bad. He's the first president in the modern era not to have 3 years or a single year of 3% plus growth during his 8. So I've been making the same prediction now. If you elect Biden or Harris, you are not going to have a good economy because the laws of economics are very simple. If you have a weak economy and you throw taxes and regulations on it, you're going to have a weaker economy. And let me end my filibuster right now by saying this. Most people don't believe in economics. Politicians don't. Oh, I'll go by, and I said this to Art Laffer, and he said, yes, but they live it. And this is what it means. John Kerry, who talked about raising taxes and it won't be a problem, took his boat out of, I believe it was New York or Connecticut, and moved it somewhere else so he wouldn't have to pay some of the taxes. You remember that? So he's living
Oh,
it.
yes, he did.
But
yes, he
somehow
did.
that doesn't apply to income. They don't actually, and I've had arguments with, I have an economics degree. I say, I don't care. If you don't believe in the law of demand that we're price sensitive, the most foundational thing, then you don't believe in economics, and end of discussion. Let's move on to the effect of your bad policies.
Oh, well, I tell you, we both said a lot on that, and your points are spot on. Tell you what, we're past break. We're going to take a 90-second final break. We're going to come back. We're going to wrap it, and we've got some good analysis on what Trump has to do to win this election now that this Harris honeymoon has ended. Be back in 90.
Don't let them win. Patriot TV is committed to delivering the truth. America's new network for patriots is growing fast, and we'd love you to join us as a member of Patriot TV. Your support makes it possible for us to continue to deliver unbiased reporting, thought-provoking discussions, and insights you won't find anywhere else. From in-depth interviews to behind-the-scenes footage, Patriot TV brings you closer to the voices shaping our nation's future. Whether it's political developments, cultural shifts, or global affairs, Patriot TV keeps you informed and empowered. As a member of Patriot TV, you'll get perks like personal invitations to exclusive Patriot TV events, where you can gather and network with like-minded Americans. We'll also host online events throughout the year with General Flynn, who's committed to host live Q&A webinars where callers like you can ask him questions and get real answers. Access to these events will be members only, so go to patriot.tv, click on Become a Member. It's fast and easy. We have a great membership option starting at just $9.99 a month, or save with our annual membership for only $99, or take advantage of the best value, the 2-year membership for just $159. Go to patriot.tv, click on Become a Member. It's fast and easy. Do your part to make sure the truth gets out to all patriots and help ensure future programming. Become a member today. Just go to patriot.tv, click on Become a Member, join today.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most precious assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Elliott Precious Metals at 720-605-3900. That's 720-605-3900.
And we're back. And folks, I strongly encourage you to reach out to Dr. Kirk Elliott. Gold prices are at record highs. All kind of dollars are floating around the globe like we've talked about, and I don't see anything that's going to stop it. All right, Thomas, we are literally at the crossroads. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Divided country. The polling right now, it's got Harris generally 1 to 3 points up, but in these swing states, it's much tighter. And with Kennedy basically stating that he's going to support Trump in most of the swing states, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, those 7 states, Kennedy's vote will have an effect. I'm of the belief that part of the reason that Harris has increased her support and has gained a slight advantage in the national popular vote against Trump is that some of the double haters, people that didn't want Biden or Trump, broke for Harris even before they heard one policy, just because it was someone youthful other than Joe Biden, who is a bumbling fool and in cognitive decline, as much as we hate to say it. I think that coincided with Kennedy's support falling from 10 or 11% down to the 5 to 6% range. But even in some of these states that I just mentioned, if his support was in the 3 to 4% range, and Trump was able to, with Kennedy's support, pick off 60, 65, 70% of those Kennedy supporters, I think that bodes very well for him. He may lose the popular vote, but again, his goal is to get to 270, and I do see him winning Georgia. I think he's leading in Pennsylvania, which would mean he would only have to pick off one other state. How do you see it right now, Thomas, based upon those poll numbers, the economy, the belief of the American voter, and the fact that 2/3 say we're going in the wrong direction?
Well, let me incorporate part of what you're saying. Throughout the first half of the year, more people identified, according to Gallup, as Republicans than Democrats. Yet the polls that showed it a tight race with Biden and the initial polls related to Kamala Harris were sampling more Democrats than Republicans. So about 2 weeks ago, there was a Marist poll where they polled 39% Democrats and only 35% Republicans. Well, if Gallup showed the self-identification up 2 for Republicans, then that's a 6-point swing, and that's how you produce a close race. Now, I think in the short run, part of what happened is your analysis of that people who double haters went because Kamala was a new face and they didn't have to, she wasn't going to be Biden. And so they initially went to her. And so that's how this race got a little bit closer. But here's what needs to go forward. And this is very, as the kids say, doable. She has flip-flopped like nobody since John Kerry. And you remember the ads where they had Kerry on a sailboard and flip-flopping on issues. Oh, yeah. They need to play those with Kamala in these battleground states. That's number one. Number two, it is essential that Trump comes off as Mr. Fix-It. Here's the border problem. Here's why it hurt us. Here's how I'm going to close it. Here's how it will benefit it. And he just needs to be as simple as that. He doesn't have to be complicated about it. And then what needs to happen is RFK needs to go out to those battleground states and appeal to disaffected Democrats and independents, saying you cannot trust the Democrats anymore because they are anti-democratic and they're the ones that are censoring and doing the bad things. If those things happen, and then one last thing, there's going to be a debate. In the debate, Trump's got to come off as Mr. Fix-It, as I described. And then what I did in my debate with her, and we had 2 debates, and only one debate had an after poll because she did so bad after the first debate where I beat her in the poll among California viewers. So think about that. I allowed her to ramble on, and even the San Francisco Chronicle said that she refused to answer a question. They literally said to her, that's fine, but will you answer the question? She couldn't do it. So Trump needs to get out of her way like he did with Biden. And if they don't ask the proper questions, Trump can simply say, what? By extending his hand and not glaring at her, but just extending his hand and saying, perhaps she can tell us the difference between her and Biden on the issues. Or perhaps she can tell us why she's flipped her view on fracking. Or what does she really mean that grocery stores are going to be subject to some commission whereby they decide whether you can raise prices or not? Or her plan to tax unrealized capital gains would require every taxpayer to fill out a form disclosing the assets, all of their assets, to the federal government, every one of us, so that the federal government can determine whether any of us have sufficient assets and income to have to pay taxes. And let her fumble from there, because when the heat's on, she doesn't two-step very well.
What is you've actually been in the debates with her? I mean, what is it about her? And I do want to get personal here for just a minute, that someone is not capable of answering basic questions. Is it just that she's trying to hide her true beliefs, as Trump has made known to everybody? Or I mean, look, I know she failed the bar exam the first time. She did pass it the second time. But is there something that is just being covered up here? Or is are the Democratic operatives really doing the right thing by keeping her away from the press and away from the media and away from press conferences? I mean, Tulsi Gabbard tore the bark off of her when they had the debate back in 2020.
Yeah, listen, local judges, when she was a DA, a young DA, and then eventually said she was unremarkable in the courtroom. She's just not very quick on her feet. The problem is, you don't get to do that with Xi Jinping, who, by the way, is a mean, sexist tyrant.
Oh, yeah.
And you can't demonstrate any weakness between, and so is Putin, by the way, and sure is punch, I don't know what the right word is, so is the ruler of Iran. So she's just not good on her feet. Some people aren't good in, remember the old show, The Crossfire? Well, she's not particularly good at that. And she's better than she was. She's better at reading speeches than she was. Although last night she literally had to read off her thank yous to people.
Oh, I know.
Really?
God,
and she had to read her past experience. I'm so done with teleprompters. I've given over 2,000 speeches and no teleprompters. Okay. When can we have someone who actually talks for themselves? Trump goes off teleprompter all the time or talks to the press without them all the time. I'm just sick of teleprompters. I'm the anti-teleprompter president of the United. We have a club, and I'm the president. Anyway, the fine point of it is she's just not that good on her feet. She's what I call a one-punch debater. She can throw that one punch, but she doesn't have a second punch, and she has a hard time following up.
Well, Tom, so I'm gonna conclude. I'm gonna agree with what you just said there, and I'm gonna conclude this. First of all, I want to thank you for coming on Schaftlien Report. And folks, little tease, we are working out some things. Hopefully he will be seen more on Patriot.tv. We'll work on that a little bit down the road. But I do want to thank you for coming on. Second, I'm going to close it out with this, what he was just talking about, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, the Ayatollahs in Iran. Listen, foreign policy has not been her strong suit. It hasn't been the Biden administration's strong suit. Trump is respected around the world. And in addition to talk about economics and that border, talk about strength because Trump is respected. All right, that's it for today's Schaftlien Report. We'll see you next weekend, and you can always catch us on Election Edge Monday through Friday, 6 Eastern, 3 Pacific. We're on Twitter, we're on Rumble, we're everywhere. Thanks for viewing, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.